We all know how expansive the lore is in this series, and it's the main reason why I and so many others obsessively enjoy it. With so much detail, it's easy to get lost or confused along the way while reading the books or watching the stripped down adaptation on the show. Hopefully this ambitious video of mine can help you with that. I'll be explaining each region starting from the west of the map. The map is too overwhelming to look at, so let me just clear some space before I start. Before people moved in and named everything, Westeros was inhabited by children of the forest and giants. These two species lived throughout Westeros, except for the Iron Islands, and would occasionally fight. It seems like the children of the forest were the more prominent of the two, since they were more civilized and advanced. Giants were not only found in Westeros, however. Some corpses can be found throughout Essos. When you look at the current map, you can see that Westeros and Essos have no physical connection, but it wasn't always this way. 12,000 years before the start of the story, a group of humans called the First Men crossed a natural bridge called the Arm of Dorne. If legends are to be believed, they were led by Garth Greenhand, the first High King. Where they came from is lost in history, since this was before the time of writing. The only thing to go by is word of mouth and cave carvings. It's possible they came from what is now the Dothraki Sea. The First Man brought horses and bronze weapons with them. There was peace at first, but the First Men began cutting down weirwood trees after they found out the children can use magic to spy on them. Their sacred weirwood trees have carved faces on them, and the children can look through their eyes to protect the forests. This caused a war between the two species, and the children were forced to destroy the Arm of Dorne with magic to end the invasion from Essos. What was left was a chain of islands called the Stepstones, where the Arm of Dorne used to be. They had powerful magic, but were vastly outnumbered by the First Men. The war had no victor, even though the First Men were doing better. They eventually signed a pact for peace and lived together in Westeros. Open lands now belonged to the First Men, and the forests were the children's new home. While the giants, First Men, and children were coexisting for a few thousand years, a new threat came into play. In the northernmost part of Westeros is a region called the Lands of Always Winter. This is where the others came from 8,000 years ago. Very little is known about this area because it's mostly unexplored, but the children and giants did live here. After the others were defeated, the wall was built to prevent another attack. Brandon the Builder has been given credit for not only constructing the wall, but also Winterfell and other landmarks in Westeros. Because of the wall, countless First Men were separated from the rest of Westeros. They started calling themselves the Free Folk, while everyone else referred to them as Wildlings. Their living conditions are so harsh that they don't name their children until they are 2 because of how high the infant mortality rate is. They would remain very primitive. The only settlement that could be even considered a town was Hardhome, but it was mysteriously destroyed 600 years before the start of the series. Some kings beyond the wall have come and gone trying to unite all of the free folk and invade their southern neighbors, but all have failed. 19 castles were raised along the wall to further guard against the others, or White Walkers. The Night's Watch has been there ever since. Brandon the Builder was the founder of House Stark, and as the years passed, kingdoms were establishing themselves. House Stark became kings in the north, and would eventually defeat all the other northern kings. Lan the Clever took Casterly Rock from the Casterlys and became the first Lannister king of the Rock, and ruled over the Westerlands. Garth Greenhand and his descendants had complete control over the Reach. Garth's firstborn son, Garth the Gardener, became the first king of the Reach, and they ruled for thousands of years before the Targaryens gave Highgarden to the Tyrells. The kingdom now known as the Stormlands was ruled by the Storm King, Doran. 6 castles were built and destroyed by weather conditions in this region, until finally Storm's End was raised, with the help of Brandon the Builder. Doran would be the founder of House Durrandon, who would rule as kings until the last Durrandon was killed in battle by Orys Baratheon thousands of years later. Orys was gifted Storm's End by his alleged half-brother Aegon the Conqueror. The Great King ruled over the Iron Islands, and all current houses in this area claim descent from him, as well as many houses in the Reach claim descent from Garth Green. Few First Men houses claim they ruled as kings in the Riverlands, and the only ones worth talking about are the Brackens and Blackwoods, who have been rivals for thousands of years. When you think of Dorne, I know the first thing that comes to mind is the Martells, but they didn't come into the picture until much later. Some of the kings in Dorne that descend from First Men include House Dane and Ironwood. House Ironwood were called the High Kings of Dorne, ruling a large portion of the region but not complete control. Dornish were always feuding with the kingdoms they shared borders with, the Stormlands and the Reach. While castles were rising and falling, another invasion from the east hit Westeros. In the hills of Andals in Essos, a man named Hugo of the Hill was supposedly crowned by gods in the faith of the Seven, and was told by the Seven that him and his descendants would have great kingdoms in a foreign land. The Andals, equipped with iron weapons, sailed the narrow sea from Essos to Westeros, landing in the Vale. This mountainous region had a few kings, but didn't have a very large population. When the Andals came, they completely dominated the First Men ruling in the Vale. The Andals of House Aaron became the kings of the mountain and Vale. The First Men who did not kneel to the Aarons fled into the mountains and became the Vale Mountain clans. They behaved similarly to wildlings and Ironborn, attacking anyone while taking women and items. After taking the Vale, the Andals moved onto the Riverlands. They were also defeated, and House Justman took control of the area as Kings of the Trident. They wouldn't stop there. The Andals would continue to the Stormlands, but Storm's End was too great of a castle to be defeated. Instead, the Durrandons intermarried with the Andals and converted to the faith. The Lannisters solved their conflicts with marriage as well after some battles and converted. House Gardner didn't even fight, instead opted for marriages and converted before any bloodshed. The North was a completely different story, however. The Starks crushed the Andals during the first attack from the east. After a change of strategy, the Andals decided to attack from the south this time. The Cranogmen of the Neck held their ground and didn't let the enemies make it further north. The Cranogmen are possibly a hybrid between the Children of the Forest and First Men, so their battles against the Andals were even more meaningful. The Andals were burning weirwood trees and killing Children of the Forest, causing them to go into hiding ever since. Dorne didn't face much of an attack in comparison to the other kingdoms. A few invaders came in and took some land, including the Martells. Morgan Martell defeated 2 First Men houses and built their new home. The last place the Andals invaded was the Iron Islands. It took them 1,000 years after landing in Westeros to make it here. 4 Ironborn houses, including the Greyjoys, joined the Andals in attacking their king. Harris Hoare married an Andal warlord's daughter and became king of the Iron Islands. House Hoare would later become ambitious centuries later and take the Riverlands and name themselves Kings of the Isles and Rivers. Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms wouldn't experience much change until the Targaryens came into the picture, which I'll get into in a bit. Essos is clearly the larger of the continents, and that's without it even being fully explored. The further east you go, the more mysterious this place gets. Before talking about Valyria, I think it's best to talk about the empires that predate it. Possibly the first ever civilization was the Great Empire of the Dawn. This empire covered all the land between the Bone Mountains and the Grey Waste. Their ruler was someone called the God on Earth, and he ruled for 10,000 years, which kinda makes this legend hard to believe. A few generations later, the God on Earth's descendant, the Bloodstone Emperor, killed his sister to take the empire for himself. What he did to his sister became known as the Blood Betrayal, and many in this area believe his actions brought in the Long Night. The Great Empire of the Dawn never recovered after the Long Night, and the empire that rose after it was the Golden Empire of Yati. This old land mostly consists of green farmland and jungles. There are 2 other cultures that claim they were the first to build towns and become powerful civilizations in Essos: the Kingdom of Sarnar and the Old Empire of Gis. Before Valyria, it was the Old Empire of Gis to conquer and rule over Essos. This empire started off in the city of Gis within the Giscari region right by Slaver's Bay. Their powerful military strength that inspired the unsullied fighting style was powerful enough to conquer the areas around Gis. They were nearly unstoppable until dragon eggs were found in the volcanoes of the Valyrian Peninsula. The people living on the Valyrian Peninsula were peaceful sheep herders, but eventually learned to tame dragons and became powerful magic users. While the old empire of Gis was expanding and building pyramids and towers, the Valyrian Freehold began their conquest. 5,000 years before the start of the series, a series of battles called the Giscari Wars took place. Every war ended with a victory for Valyria. The dragons and Valyrian steel overwhelmed the Giscari in the 5th and final war. The capital city of Gis was destroyed. After turning the city into ruins, the Dragon Lords salted the fields so nothing could ever grow again. The most powerful empire was defeated to the point where their culture and even their language disappeared forever. The Giscari were known for their use of slaves, and the Valyrians took notes. Survivors of the war were forced to mine the volcanoes and all their cities were colonized. There is a small island called New Gis south of where Old Gis used to be, and the slaving cities Astapor, Yunkai, and Marine that Daenerys is liberating claim descent from the Giscari. The Valyrian Freehold quickly became the most powerful and advanced civilization in Essos, all because of dragons. The people of Ashai by the Shadow claim dragons first appeared in the Shadowlands. They also say that the city has been there since the world began and will stand until it ends. With all the magic that goes on in this city, it's hard not to believe it. The Old Empire of Gis is the only civilization that can prove they were the first, since they have writings that predate any other, so it's generally believed they were the first. Ashai is easily the most mysterious location in the entire series. The city is huge, but sparsely populated. The people here walk around alone with masks and you never see any children. A lot of dark magic is performed and learned here since no practice is forbidden. Lucky for the people, Ashai is a port city where traders bring food and water. Their only source of water is the river called the Ash. In the day, the river is black but glows green at night. The river is undrinkable and the fish are blind and deformed. All animals brought to Ashai soon die. The city is in darkness with the buildings made of oily black stone that absorb light. The Shadowlands is a mysterious mountainous region covered with ghost grass. Ghost grass is a tall white plant that kills other life and prevents anything else from growing. The only city within the Shadowlands is Saigai. This city is in ruin and is known to be a haunted corpse city. Even the creepiest sorcerers known as Shadowbinders are afraid to go here. The people of Asshai and others east of Giscard were fortunate enough that the Dragon Lords of Valyria had their eyes set on conquering the areas of western Essos. While Hugo of the Hill claimed the 7 Promises People kingdoms in a foreign land, Valyria was attacking the Andals of Andalos, and they ran to Westeros instead of being enslaved. The first colony founded by the Valyrian Freehold was Volantis. It is one of 9 free city colonies and is known as the First Daughter. Like Volantis, Tyroge started as a military outpost. Lys was a paradise vacation spot for the Dragon Lords. Merchant adventurers from the Freehold founded Myr and Pentos. Some religious Valyrians who shared different views compared to the others in the Freehold founded Lorath, Norvos, and Qohar. The last of the free cities is Braavos. Braavos was never a colony under the Freehold. While on ships from Valyria to a new colony, slaves on board took control of the ships and escaped their masters. They traveled to a distant lagoon that was well hidden by hills covered with pine trees and fog that covers this area. Some of these slaves were said to be women from Jagos Nahai. North of Yeti is an area called the Plains of the Jagos Nahai. They are nomadic people similar to the Dothraki. Like the Dothraki, they constantly attack everyone around them, but these two races do have their differences. The Jagos Nahai are a lot shorter and modify their heads at a young age to make it pointed. They also do not attack their own people, unlike the Dothraki, who regularly kill each other. While the Valyrians didn't have the chance to conquer the lands this far east, probably due to the Bone Mountains and the Great Sand Sea, having Jagos Nahai slaves proves they did venture out this far. Braavos remained a secret city for 100 years. A Sea Lord of Braavos who rules over the people sent out ships all over to inform the world of Braavos' existence. Even after this bold move, the city remained hidden for hundreds of more years. What started as the youngest of the free cities, Braavos in the current story is the wealthiest and most powerful. While the other 8 free cities are called Daughters of Valyria, Braavos is referred to as the bastard daughter of Valyria. A little over 1,000 years before the start of the story, Valyria's expansion reached the Rhoynar. The Rhoynar are an ethnic group of people who lived along the massive Rhoyne River. The powerful group of cities used water magic and were the first to work iron into weapons and armor. They taught their Andal neighbors how to do the same. The Rhoynar had some victories during the 250-year-long war, but like always, Valyria overwhelmed them with dragons. Nymeria, a princess of Rhoynar, took the surviving women, children, and elderly onto 10,000 ships to escape the Dragon Lords. Her journey is one of my favorite backstories, and serves as a perfect segue to some of the islands in the known world. Nymeria and her 10,000 ships first stopped at the Basilisk Isles. Pirates on these islands scared them off to Southeros, the southern continent you don't hear much about in this story. Southeros is mostly unexplored, and it's because this place is a nightmare. Imagine an Amazon rainforest on steroids. This continent is mostly jungle with some desert and mountains. There are some inhabitants, and I don't know how they even survive. The people eat each other, the place is filled with plague and disease, the weather is brutal, but you need to hear the wildlife they have going on here. They have wyverns, which are like dragons that don't spit fire, and even apes big enough to kill an elephant with one hit. A dragon lord atop her dragon flew over top the continent for 3 years, concluding it's as large as Essos. The Giscari Empire did have some colonies near the shore. Valyria took ownership after defeating the old empire, but would eventually abandon it. After spending a year here, Nymeria decided this is no place to build a home for her people. There is a 4th continent in the series, but all we know is that it's called Ulthos. George Martin added it in to illustrate how little the people of Westeros know of the world. Nymeria's next stop would be Nath. The people of Nath are extremely peaceful and don't believe in killing anything. After years of traveling, the Rhoynar finally had a warm welcome, only to find a very deadly disease that infects any outsider to the island. The people of Nath are immune to this disease that is spread by butterflies, and anyone else soon dies from this illness. Their next stop was Abulu in the Summer Islands. Nymeria and her people were not permitted to stay on any of the main islands because the Summer Islanders feared a Valyrian attack. The Rhoynar stayed on the small island of Bulu for 2 years, but weren't able to grow food on the island's thin soil. The Summer Islands do have an interesting history. Since they were fairly isolated from the rest of the world, they always believed they were alone in the world, surrounded only by the sea. When a Giscari ship washed ashore one of the islands, their curiosity bloomed. They built huge unique ships and became trading partners with the Valyrian Freehold. What the Valyrians wanted and paid most for was slaves. Since it was the island's own ruler selling his people, it took a revolution from a former slave girl to end this tragedy. The island doesn't have any natural metal, so the warriors used powerful bows made from golden heart trees that could pierce armor. Their final stop would be Dorne. Before I talk about all that, I think I should go over some of the cooler islands around Essos since we're on the topic of islands. Great Murrock is the largest island in the known world and was conquered by a god emperor of Yeti. In the northeast lies an expansive archipelago called the Thousand Islands. The inhabitants of these islands are pretty creepy. Their skin has a green tint to it and they are hairless. They are afraid of outsiders and sacrifice visitors to their gods. Not only are they afraid of visitors, but are mortally terrified of water. Some believe an old civilization that existed here long ago drowned by the sea. The Ibbenese claim there's actually less than 300 islands in the Thousand Islands archipelago. Speaking of the Ibbenese, the northernmost part of Essos is Ib. Ib and the small islands around it are full of forests and mountains. The Ibbenese are short, hairy people with broad shoulders who hunt whales. They don't seem that different, but they aren't able to easily have children with people from any other race. Nymeria made a lord named Morris Martell in Dorne and burned all her ships to declare they found their new home and would never sail to Essos again. They formed House Nymeria Martell and were able to conquer all of Dorne together for the first time. They adopted a lot of Roynish customs and called themselves princes and princesses instead of kings and queens. Another custom brought into Dorne was equal rights, allowing women to rule. At the height of Valyria's strength, a smaller Dragonlord family decided to leave everything behind and move the entire Targaryen house to Valyria's westernmost outpost, Dragonstone. All this because of one Targaryen's prophecy of the destruction of the entire peninsula. She happened to be right, and 12 years later the Doom of Valyria happened. All the volcanoes erupted, killing every dragon in person. With the superpower of Essos suddenly wiped out, chaos hit the continent. This time period is called the Century of Blood. The Dothraki were a group of nomadic people who came from east of the Bone Mountains. They left a path of bones on these mountains, and it's how it got its name. While Valyria was in power, they were nothing but a nuisance to others. But during the Century of Blood, they united under one call. They almost completely wiped out the kingdom of Sarnar, who were very powerful, but underestimated a united Dothraki. The only city left in this kingdom is Sath. They were called the Tall Men and needed the support of Ib and Lorath to survive the attacks. The Cathy, another ancient civilization in the grasslands, were also almost completely destroyed. The only city left is Karth, and they survived because of their triple walls. The area that is known as the grasslands had been renamed the Dothraki Sea. The only settlement in the Dothraki Sea is Vos Dothrak. It's the only city of the Dothraki and is run by slaves and the wives of former Khals. No blade is allowed to be carried, and it's forbidden to shed a freedman's blood in the city. Instead of heading east from Dragonstone, Aegon the Conqueror and his Targaryen sister wives decided to head west and conquer Westeros, leaving Essos in the past. It would only take 2 years to unite 6 of the 7 kingdoms. Dorne was the only kingdom able to hold off the 3 dragons. Aegon gave the Stormlands to his supposed half-brother Orys Baratheon after Orys defeated the Storm King. After roasting House Gardener, the Reach was given to their stewards, House Tyrell. House Horror burned within their gigantic castle, Harrenhal. They were the kings of the isles and rivers at the time. The Iron Islands went to the Greyjoys and the Riverlands went to the Tullys. To be more a part of the 7 kingdoms, Aegon made his family's home near Blackwater Bay. It was near the center of all the kingdoms and didn't belong to anyone. King's Landing became the capital, and the region became known as the Crown Lands. King's Landing quickly grew to be the largest port city with the highest population. It surpassed the 4 other cities known as the major cities of Westeros: Old Town, Lannisport, Gulltown, and White Harbor. And there you have it, Game of Thrones map detailed. I know some of the explanations were pretty brief, but the majority of the locations here deserve videos on their own. I just always feel ambitious before the new season and make massive videos like this every year, like the timeline video and my Targaryen family tree. Thanks for watching, guys.